Hey guys, Matt Goodwin here from the Substack at mattgoodwin.org. Already in this general election campaign, Nigel Farage has caused outrage by pointing to alarming attitudes among British Muslims, in particular worrying attitudes towards issues like Hamas, Israel, integration, and their role in British society. Farage caused this outrage when he was being interviewed by Trevor Phillips just this last weekend, and I wanted to drill down and look at actually, was he right? Now, regular readers of the Substack at mattgoodwin.org know some of the findings that I'm going to share from a remarkable recent survey by JL Partners for the Henry Jackson Society, and they polled 1,000 British Muslims and asked them a series of questions about British life, national life, and put simply, the results are utterly shocking. Contrary to all of those people in SW1, the BBC, Westminster, who say we don't really have an issue here, stop talking about it, actually the reliable survey findings tell us something else indeed. Firstly, more British Muslims than not reject the suggestion that the Islamist extremist group Hamas committed murder and rape in Israel on October the 7th. In fact, overall, some 40% of British Muslims rejected the suggestion Hamas committed murder and rape on October the 7th, compared to only 19% who thought that Hamas did commit these atrocities. This puts British Muslims, by the way, firmly at odds with the wider British public. 62% of all Brits actually believe the official version of events, that Hamas did commit murder and rape on October the 7th. British Muslims much less likely to think this way. And actually, even more worryingly, the survey finds that it's the youngest British Muslims, 18 to 24-year-olds, who are the most likely to reject the suggestion that Hamas committed murder and rape, with nearly half of them, 47%, holding this view. And the picture becomes even more striking when we look at some of the other remarkable findings which I've talked about in the Substack. For example, nearly half of all British Muslims, 46%, and nearly 6 in 10 of the youngest British Muslims, 58%, sympathise with Hamas, compared to only 16% of ordinary British people. British Muslims are much more likely than average to sympathise with Hamas, a violent extremist Islamist group. Another question, do people feel positively about Hamas? Well, only 8% of the British public feel positively about Hamas. 29% of British Muslims do, and 34% of the youngest British Muslims do. So not only more likely to sympathise with Hamas, but more likely to express positive attitudes of the Islamist extremist group. And when people are asked, well, why do you think Hamas attacked Israel on October the 7th? More than half of all British Muslims, 52%, say it was because Hamas wanted to forward the Palestinian cause. Only 11% felt that it was because Hamas wanted to kill Jews and is set on the destruction of Israel. Among all British people, it's very, very different. They're much more likely to say Hamas wanted to kill Jews, 40% hold that view, rather than advance the Palestinian cause, which only 26% think. And on a range of other questions here, we can see some pretty shocking and alarming attitudes among British Muslims. For example, nearly half think that Israel does not have a right to exist as a Jewish homeland. 49% of British Muslims hold that view. Again, younger Muslims much more likely to think this way. Nearly 80% of British Muslims believe that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians. Younger Muslims, again, much more likely to think this way. And also, British Muslims much more likely to endorse various anti-Semitic tropes about the supposed power and influence of Jews. For example, nearly half of all British Muslims, 47%, think Jewish people have too much power over foreign policy, compared to only 20% of all voters. And you know, what's alarming to me, at least in these surveys, is they really show the extent to which not a small number, but a very significant number of British Muslims clearly want to rewire British ways of life, British institutions, British society. For example, about 1/3 believe that the implementation of Sharia law in Britain over the next 20 years would be a desirable outcome. 32% of British Muslims hold that way, only 9% of British people do. They also have a very uneasy relationship with free speech and free expression. More than half of all British Muslims, 52%, think it's desirable that we should make it illegal to show a picture or cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad, a bit like the school teacher in Batley did, who's still in hiding. Only 16% of British people agree with that. When it comes to homosexuality, 27% of British Muslims think outlawing homosexuality would be a desirable outcome. They're much more likely than the British public to oppose homosexuality. And 40% of British Muslims, and nearly half of young British Muslims, 46%, think that the formation of a Muslim-only political party would be desirable. So what are we left with? Well, as I write in the Substack, which you can get at mattgoodwin.org, contrary to what we're often told by the new elite, the new ruling class, that our policies of mass immigration and multiculturalism have been an unalloyed success story, that everybody is integrating nicely and fully into British society. Actually, when we look past the rhetoric, when we look past the language, when we look at the actual evidence drawn from reliable, robust surveys and opinion polls, we find that there are more than a few big problems in British society. Alarmingly large numbers of British Muslims today, especially younger Muslims who have come of age in the 2000s and the 2010s, express views that are very clearly and firmly at odds with the views that are held by the wider British public. And I think we need to be able to talk about these findings. I think we need to be able to reflect on these findings, and we need to be able to think much more seriously about what we're going to do about these alarming attitudes in British society, because they are not confined to a fringe minority. Many of these views, as I've shown you, such as support for Hamas, sympathy for Islamist extremism, anti-Semitism, the desire to segregate from British society in different ways, these are not fringe views. If anything, these appear to increasingly be mainstream views within British Muslim communities, and we need to think about why that is, and more importantly, what we can do about it. So if you're interested, come and join us, mattgoodwin.org. I'm always writing about countercultural issues. I'm never afraid to challenge the zeitgeist, to challenge the dominant orthodoxy in the big cities, in Westminster and SW1. So do come and join us. I'll see you there.